Now, at this point, this is turning bad, real bad. And this is, again, there's so much great information in here and such good documentation of the way this combat takes place. But suffice it to say, at this point, I'm skipping forward, they are getting really crushed. They got mass casualties. They're when they advance. So imagine this. Remember I talked about the Germans know exactly where their mortars are going to hit? Yeah. Well, the Americans will storm forward and fight hard and get to another hedgerow. Mm-hmm. When they get to this new hedgerow, where the Germans were, where they just beat the Germans out of there, the Germans have that hedgerow dialed as well. So now, as soon as they get position, they start getting immediate effective fire from mortars. So this is a total nightmare, and that's what's happening. And at this point, they're completely bogged down. And this might be, you don't get to hear a story like this very often. So the regimental executive, Colonel Smith, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, shows up. So above the chain of command of the battalion is the regiment, and the senior person in the regiment is the colonel, the regimental commander, and this is his executive. The person one down from the regimental commander is this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, and he shows up, and here's what he says. "What's the matter, Johns? Why aren't you getting anywhere?" Smith gasped. And he's gasped because he's running into this position. The major pointed to the bloody trail, to the dead men, to the shells that were savaging the trees, and finally in the direction of the nearby front from which came the plodding sound of mortar fire. His eyes were lacking their usual snap, and he answered dully, "They're too tough." Smith blinked several times. He was obviously trying to think of something to say, something that would inspire this listless battalion commander to new effort. "Well," he finally brought out, "you got to get going right away. Regiment has got to move. You just got to get going." Johns shook his head. He wasn't having any. "Not today," was all he would say. So we're talking mentally defeated at this point. And even the regimental commander coming in, or the regimental executive commander coming in, telling him, "Hey, you got to move. You just got to go." Which is that encouragement. This reminds me of in jiu-jitsu tournaments. You ever seen a coach saying, like, "You got to get on top.
Yeah.
You got to do something.
Yeah. Got to get out of there."
Yeah. That doesn't help me.
Yeah.
So that's what he's saying. Hey, you just got to go. I'm getting mortared. My guys are getting mowed down. I can't do it. So back to the book. Then, for some reason, both men looked up the hedgerow toward the rear. Colonel McDaniel, the new division chief of staff, was striding toward them, oblivious of the fire. Just as he reached the command post, a volley of 4 rounds screamed into the field just beyond the hedgerow. The concussion tumbled him into the hole with the major and Smith. But McDaniel did not lose his natural dignity, and he was smiling as he said, "Hello, Johns. Smith, how are we doing?" Now we got a leader coming in that's very calm and very cool, and just got blasted into their hole, by the way.
Yeah.
And he looks up, smiles, and says, "How are we doing?" Johns made an effort to perk up a bit, but his voice lacked conviction or force as he told McDaniel all about the situation. The chief of staff surveyed the scene, weighing it all very carefully before he answered. When he did, his tone was serious, and he was not smiling. "Johns, when you were on maneuvers in Louisiana, or at VMI, and while you were studying at Leavenworth, you saw situations where units had to be sacrificed knowingly in order to get a job done, didn't you?" The battalion commander nodded. "When you saw those things, you probably never thought very much about them, just accepted them as a matter of course in war, didn't you?" The major nodded again. "You never stopped to think, probably, that there might come a time when you and your unit would be the one that had to be sacrificed to enable the parent unit to accomplish its mission." The major's eyes were opening wider as he shook his head. "Well, I don't know for sure, but maybe this is that time. I do know that this is the highest ground on the Corps front and the key to the entire defense of St. Lo. Corps expects us to break it, and we think you are the man to do the job, at whatever cost. Now don't let us down." Without another word, he got to his feet and walked back the way he had come. The regimental executive tagged after him. Johns watched them go. Suddenly he remembered that what the general had said to him the day before. "I'm counting on you." He turned to Weddle, who had watched this little drama with detached interest. "Leroy," the major said as he squared his shoulders and pointed to the sinking sun, "take a damn good look at that sun, old boy, because it's probably the last time any of us will ever see it. Let's go." Johns never knew later just what he did the rest of that afternoon and early evening. He remembered moving around the command post, forward, again, and he knew that he had needled the company commanders unmercifully, threatening them with relief of their commands, begging, pleading, anything he could think of that would work with that individual at that moment. He found that there was a comparatively weak spot in the German lines opposite Baker again. He badgered Martin into persuading the artillery to give him all the fire that he could hit that spot at one time. That meant a lot of guns. When they all fired 3 rounds as fast as the gunners could load them, 100 yards of German-held hedgerow went up in flame and smoke and dust. Again, most of Baker Company streamed across the field and into the gap blasted by the artillery. That took the heart out of the paratroopers, and the paratroopers he's talking about are German paratroopers, who began to fall back all along the line. It was no rout. The Germans retired from their flanking threat Baker posed, having gained a place in their main line. But they fell back slowly, fighting every foot of the way. The tenacious paratroopers slowed the weakened battalion again, but they could not stop it entirely. The company commanders and the platoon leaders, together with the battalion CEO, had thrown off their apathy, taken a second wind, and were not to be denied. At dark, thanks to the inspired leadership that had been provided in a few short minutes by Colonel McDaniel, the German line was broken beyond repair. The battered American battalion had made 500 bloody yards. As dusk faded into darkness, the firing began to diminish, only to flare briefly again on the left. Then it died away into silence. Kenny called in to say there had been a light counterattack on the left flank. He had easily kicked it off. The major did not ask for permission to halt the advance. He gave orders to dig in for the night after he was sure the companies had close contact on their flanks. So, there you go. That's just an amazing account of not only of leadership, but of what leadership was capable of. I mean, Johns was pretty much done. He's literally saying, "Not today. They're too tough." And the way that McDaniel convinces him and explains to him that, you know, those times when you were doing exercises and they'd sacrifice a unit so that they can accomplish the mission. I'm not sure, but I think you're that unit right now, and we're counting on you to get it done. Unbelievable. You know, that's one of those things too, where that's where you know, from a leadership perspective, you're now, you know, entering a situation where duty is going to be the most important thing to you, and you also know that the mission is the most important thing. You've got to put that at the top of your priorities, and you know you're going to sacrifice guys, and it's going to be a nightmare. But the alternative is you're not going to win. You're not going to win. That's the alternative, is that your team is not going to be able to achieve this. And you know, at this point in the war, this war was not settled yet by any stretch. This war was not settled. And so to give up ground and start to let the Germans reorganize and let them start to gain high ground, which is what they were fighting for here. That's not just going to affect your men, it's going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
And so I've said this on the podcast before, the definition of a team is when the members of the team think the team is more important than themselves. And that's what you see right here. They realize, Johns realizes that, look, we're going to be, and the title of the book is Clay Pigeons. You know what a clay pigeon is, right?
Yes, sir.
It's what you throw up in the air and shoot at, and it's a sacrificial piece of clay.
Yeah.
And that's why the name of the book is The Clay Pigeons of St. Lo, because that's, in many cases, the situation that they're in.
Yeah.
So this is different than when Napoleon says, hey, if you get told to do something and it's not smart and you do it anyways, you're culpable.
Yeah.
Johns, he can't say, look, no, this isn't smart. He knows it's the right thing to do. That's the big difference that I'm trying to get at here. This isn't a guy who's saying, look, hey, we're going to charge this machine gun nest and I'm going to lose, half my platoon, but it's not going to make any big deal, and I'm a bad leader because I sacrificed my platoon for a meaningless machine gun nest. This is a guy that knows that this objective is important, knows that this high ground is needed, knows that the success of this, not just this mission, but the success of this whole assault on France and thereby Germany is riding on what they're doing. Now, you could break it down and say, well, they could hold back and they could wait. Well, what happens when you hold back and wait? Do the Germans have more reinforcements that they're sending their way? What does that actually mean? And so he has calculated in his mind, you know what? We need to do this. For the good of everyone, we need to do this.